Hi, it's Penny Black and Jill Foster here with a new Brushstroke Basics technique video. And the purpose of this video is to give you some ideas on how to stamp and paint and color with our brushstroke stamp called a berry branch. So within this video I will be showing you how to do the basic stamping with this stamp, but here's a look at a finished card featuring that design. Real quick before we begin, I just wanted to pop up this supply list, and I will put this back up on screen at the very end of the video, so if you want to look at it in more detail at that time, you can just hit pause and check it out. So to do my stamping, I am stamping using the Misti stamp positioning tool. And I'm stamping onto hot press watercolor paper. This is Fabriano hot press watercolor paper. I've chosen this paper because it has a nice smooth finish, but I can also add wet media on top of this. I'm inking my stamp using Ranger Archival ink. This is the mini size ink pad and the color is leaf green. The mini size makes it easy to, at this point, just apply the ink to the green leafy areas. And right now I'm just working on getting sort of a base layer of color onto the paper with the stamp. I'll go back and add shading with paints at the end, but I want to just get that stamped and it will give me some idea where to add the shading. So one really neat thing about these brushstroke stamps is when you stamp them, you will get areas of light and areas of dark, which if you stopped right after stamping it a couple of times in your stamp positioning tool, as you can see here, you could definitely just stop there. If you like to do some painting, you can then stamp it first, and those areas of light and dark will tell you where to add your shading. So it makes it very easy and just the fun of painting, then you don't have to think too hard about where to put the light and the dark. So to get in on these sort of branch areas that are very small, I'm using a Tombow dual brush pen. And that just allows me to apply that color onto those really small areas without getting it all over everything else. You may find it helpful to have the packaging that comes with your stamp just sitting like right off to the left so that you can look at that when you're applying your inks or your markers onto the stamp. You can see where to apply them. Now the stamping that I did with the leaves, all of that green stamping, that is an archival ink. So that ink is permanent once it's dry. So when I add my painting on top of those big, large areas, those large leaves, that ink underneath is not going to reconstitute. It's not going to blend anymore. So there's different ways to do that. If you stamp, say, with a distress ink, you can go back in and just blend it, and that ink will sort of reconstitute and reblend as you add water. This ink will not. And I like that sometimes because then when I add my painting on top, it doesn't blend too much. Sometimes you can just get sort of a hot mess if things start blending and running too much. So you might want to play around with what types of inks you want to stamp with. Now the marker inks, those are water soluble. So when I add water or liquid paints on top of those, they will start to blend a little bit. But this was such a small area, just those berries and those branches, that wasn't a concern for me. So I'm going to go in now and add my shading and to these leaves using Distress Ink Reinkers as watercolors. So I just put a little drop onto a palette and then I'm picking it up with a paintbrush and water and just sort of intensifying the dark areas that you can see already when you've stamped the image. So just wherever I see that it's darker from my stamping, then I go back in there and add darker color right on top. This also gives just a little bit of a smoother finish. And if you like to paint like line art images, this is just painting, instead of painting inside the lines, you're basically painting on top of the lines or on top of the stamping. And all of your sort of clues or hints where to make things light and dark are right there included with the stamping, which I really like. Then it's just sort of like brainless fun for me as I'm painting. You could also add your shading on top with watercolors. You could do markers on top or even colored pencils if you wanted to go in and add real detailed work right on top. the options are really limitless. Like I said, you could stop right here and not even add any painting on top, and it looks really beautiful. It's up to you with what you like to do, and I'll be sharing several other brushstroke basic videos with our new Christmas release, and may give you some ideas of different ways you can vary the techniques to suit the supplies that you have on hand or your particular style of coloring and stamping. So just continue to work on adding that shading to the leaves. Here I'm going to go in on these other leaves with a little bit different colors. So the first color I did was peeled paint, and now this color is evergreen bough. And this will just give a touch of a bluish green or turquoise look to these smaller leaves. I just wanted a little bit of variation. And you can see now as I add these paints on top, like I said before, because these are stamped with an archival ink, one that does not reconstitute when it gets wet, it's so easy to just add the shading and the coloring right on top, and none of that is sort of moving around underneath while you're trying to paint. And I'll just continue to go in, darken things up as I go. Now sometimes when those paints dry, they dry a little bit lighter. I find not too light when I'm using the re-inkers as a watercolor, but if I find it just got a little bit too light, sometimes I go back in on top and just add another layer of color, which I'm doing here. The same color, just adding a little bit more. And now on these larger leaves, I'm going in with an even darker green. This is the Forest Moss Distress Re-Inker, and just even adding even more depth to that shading and to those colors. Now all of the colors that I am using, the inks, my paintbrush, my paper, the stamps, all of those will be listed at the very end of the video. Like I said, up on screen in the supply list. So if there's anything you want to double check or give a try yourself, you can just hit pause when it's up there and check it out. That includes all of these paints that I'm using off to the side. And again here, just going in with that darker green. Wherever I want the color to be darkest, that's usually the first place that I put the brush, and then I sort of work my way out. And if it needs more blending, I dip my brush in some water and then sort of blend that out with water. This is another time too, it's really handy to have the packaging right next to you to give you some ideas on the shading. Now I did stamp those branches with the marker, so I can go in with just water on my paintbrush and sort of blend and smooth that out. I'm also picking up a little Gathered Twigs Distress Ink Re-Inker and putting it right on top to darken things up a little bit. I do want to be careful here not to use too much paint or too much water, because that marker that I use to ink the stamp and stamp is water soluble, so it will start to bleed a little bit when it gets water on it. And then finally, for the last step, I'm just going in with some Barn Door Distress Ink Re-Inker and brightening up those berries, also sort of blending out that stamping that I did with the marker ink for those berries. And here's a look at the finished stamping and coloring once I was done. Now I did take this same piece and did some masking around the outer perimeter and inking and stamping in the center in order to make that a card. It is a 5x7 card. And I will put a link down in the YouTube description box below for some videos that show how to do that background inking and stamping. I thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this brushstroke basics video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also connect with Penny Black on Facebook, Pinterest, Twitter, Instagram, as well as on our website and blog. And again, I'll link to all of those for you down in the YouTube description box below.